Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your main course. And I'd also like to welcome now viewers across Australia joining us on ABC News 24 and Sky for Bill Shorten's speech. Bill Shorten certainly needs no introduction, especially in front of an audience in his hometown, but I'll give you a potted version anyway. After a long stint as the head of the Australian Workers' Union, Bill was elected to federal parliament in 2007 as the member for Maribyrnong. He served in various roles in the Rudd and Gillard governments, including serving as Minister for Workplace Relations and Education. In October last year, of course, he was formally appointed elected leader of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party. 2014 is already shaping up as a very big political year. It looks as though we're going to be racing off for a re-election in the West in a couple of months' time, and also facing a very tough budget in May. Bill is going to speak for half an hour or so, then he's more than happy to take questions from the floor, so I'd encourage you to get up and ask a question. I'd particularly encourage the students joining us here from Kilvington Grammar. Welcome all. Please, I'd be very disappointed actually if one of you didn't get up and ask a question, because in my experience at these sort of events, students sometimes ask more penetrating questions than the journos, so an experience I'm sure Bill Shorten's familiar with. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bill Shorten.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to be here. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet. I'd also like to thank the Melbourne Press Club for the opportunity to talk about the future of Australia today. And I'd also encourage the students from Kilvington. Michael's right, I do expect more penetrating questions. On Tuesday of this week, I travelled to Point Henry to meet with employees and employers at Alcoa. It's a trip I've made many times. As I looked out the car window, I started thinking about all the workplaces that I used to visit in the Geelong region. Qantas maintenance facilities at Avalon, the Gatic foundry, BHP Wire, Geelong Cement, Blue Circle at Warren Ponds, Kinnear's Ropes, the Wool Scourers, Winchester, Cheetham Salts. All of these proud landmarks in Geelong's manufacturing landscape. All of them now closed. In this time of change, on the one hand, we need to move past the view that industry assistance should be motivated by a romantic attachment to manufacturing. But on the other, we should reject the idea that manufacturing somehow doesn't matter anymore or is indeed doomed. The Labor I lead knows that manufacturing in Australia does have a future. We understand that neither nostalgia nor fatalism are equal to the task of 21st century economic reform. And sometimes in the current debate on job losses and factory closures, we can fall into the trap of just referring to numbers in a column. We need to remember that these are real people, real communities for whom each closure, each announcement on the nightly news is in fact a devastating loss. In the last 5 months, in Geelong, in Broadmeadows, in Gove, and in Port Melbourne, I've met thousands of Australians facing the swift, sharp consequences of the economic change that we're undergoing. Australians don't think that the world owes them a living. Australians are not looking for a handout, but they are worried about what is happening. Australians are hungry for a plan for their future, for the Australia of 2020 and 2030. The Australian people understand that there's no such thing as a job for life anymore, but several careers with constant learning and relearning. Australians know that what matters is to have a diversified economy, one which includes advanced manufacturing, an economy that is set up to benefit from the next inevitable wave of technological change, one which promises to return manufacturing to our cities and to nurture a new generation of Australians enthusiastic about making things, whether that means computer games and robots or cars and houses. Today I want to talk about what we have to do to help Australian employees, Australian employers, Australian industry, and the Australian economy adapt and prosper in this time of change. What Australia needs to do is meet the challenges of this decade. And we need policies that guarantee our national prosperity beyond the next 3 years. I am determined that Labor will be the party with positive ideas about our future. Because we do need new ideas in health, new ideas in education, new ideas for our economy. I know that when he was opposition leader, Tony Abbott used his political Ouija board to channel Lord Randolph Churchill from the 19th century. Oppose everything, propose nothing, and turf the government out. Now, the Abbott model did work at the last election. I firmly believe, however, it will not work again. I prefer to take my inspiration from the New Year's resolution of John Curtin when he was elected opposition leader, to act and think helpfully and not play fault finder. Throughout my working life, from when I was a lawyer to a union rep to a superannuation fund director and the Parliamentary Secretary for Disabilities and indeed a minister, I've always been a consensus builder and a believer in the power of negotiation. I know there is always more than one side to every argument. And I know that no one, no matter how well-intentioned, has a monopoly on all the good ideas. And that will be my approach as Labor leader. It's why Labor has reached out to cooperate with the government on drought assistance for our farmers. It's why we've avoided overly opportunistic point scoring on the deterioration of our relationship with Indonesia. It's why we support the government's new Closing the Gap targets and indeed have proposed 3 of our own. Under my leadership, Labor will be constructive. It will be an alternative government that offers genuine policy choices, not simply empty criticism or 3-word slogans. Our policies will be driven by Labor values, supported by hard evidence and the best science. I think this combination of principle and logic is evident in some of the reforms of the previous 6 years. For example, we created the National Disability Insurance Scheme to empower an important but marginalised group of Australians, people with impairment, their carers, the people who love them. The National Disability Insurance Scheme will deliver a productivity boost to our nation and it'll save taxpayer money in the long run. We too resisted the harsh austerity measures and steered Australia through the global financial crisis with industry, with financial services, with a focus on keeping people in work and supporting growth with nation-building infrastructure investment. We negotiated a fairer funding agreement for schools because we believe that every child deserves the same opportunity for a great education and the best possible start in life. We understand that a country's education system is the decisive factor in its economic prosperity for future generations. Our objective is to deliver the best outcome for everyone, not to score political points simply or slavishly follow a hardline ideology. People rightly laud the Hawke-Keating generation as a time when Labor delivered changes, hard decisions, that delivered a dividend for that generation. Those reforms to markets, to deregulation, to trade and to enterprise bargaining freed up the Australian economy. 20 years on, my generation and all of us need to recommit to real reform. In particular, Australia needs a new, energised national commitment to science and innovation. This will mean making difficult decisions in order to set our nation up for the next generation. We believe that government assistance for industries should be the exception, not the rule. Provided only to industries that are willing to adapt to change and embrace innovation. We do believe government has a moral obligation to try its hardest to keep people in work. But our view is not just based on our values. The evidence is clear. When a government assists an industry in transition, the benefits are shared throughout the economy. If we leave people and companies and communities to wither, or seek to accelerate their demise, we are putting future Australian jobs, future skills, future innovation and technology at risk of permanent and severe damage. As I mentioned earlier, there is a misconception that manufacturing is an unprofitable sector that offers only low-tech, dirty jobs. This is wrong. In 2013, 21 of Australia's 100 most profitable companies were in manufacturing, the highest representation of any one industry. And there is no such thing as a low-technology industry. There are only industries and companies that have invested in remaining at the cutting edge and those that have not. Some commentators have argued that the closure of Holden, the announced closure of Holden and now Toyota, is proof of national economic progress. Not true. In fact, the death of the Australian auto industry is a major backward step, a dangerous deindustrialisation. Not only will we lose valuable skills and highly specialised workers, we lose an entire range of manufacturing capabilities. Capabilities that could have underpinned more sophisticated and advanced forms of manufacturing. The capability to manufacture fine instruments and gauges for the aerospace industry. The capability to produce electrical systems for our Navy's weapon systems. All of these capabilities, all of that potential, all of that opportunity will be lost to our nation unless we act decisively now. Because with the right plan and the right settings, Australia can capitalise in a time of transition and change. We can seize the opportunity to reimagine our manufacturing sector and look after the thousands, the tens of thousands of Australians and the thousands of businesses that rely upon it. But there has been no plan by the Abbott government. There is no evidence of a determination to seize the moment. It is easy for Joe Hockey to lecture Australians on the need to do the heavy lifting. But the Abbott government has to do more of this than just simply demand it of the rest of us. It needs to set the example. It needs to lead the way. In times of economic transition, a government's first priority should be to keep people in work. Because a fulfilling job brings identity, self-esteem, independence. Unemployment guarantees only unhappiness and misery. As Labor leader, I will continue to speak out about job losses and support for existing jobs. As Labor leader, I shall focus too on the new jobs, the small to medium enterprises, the high-tech, the startups, be it in health, be it in agriculture and defence, or financial and education services. I believe we need to shift from a policy of managed decline to one that focuses on development, focuses on innovation, focuses on transition. In the immediate context of our car industry, the government needs to assist the component suppliers, the plastic, the glass, the metal manufacturers, to adjust their operations and to find new markets for their products. A success story is the Palm Products factory in Moorabbin. This was a business that originally produced high-quality car instrument lenses and brake parts and small mouldings for Ford. Following Ford's announced closure, Palm Products has reinvented itself as a producer of high-quality, unbreakable drink and foodware, with export markets into Europe, the Middle East and North America. The long lead time for the closure of Holden and Toyota gives their skilled workers the time to plan their futures if we start now. I do believe there is a role for government to strongly support retraining. People who suddenly find themselves unemployed often experience a massive loss of confidence and a loss of identity. The longer their unemployment lasts, the greater their deterioration in work readiness. Yet this workforce are highly skilled problem solvers and team players. I have genuinely been surprised by the cold-blooded heartnesses that the Abbott government has displayed when pushed on their plans for the jobs of the future. I am troubled that there has been no sense of urgency, no evidence of a passion to help create the jobs of the future. It's confusing, really, because on one hand, the Abbott government has been at pains to portray that the demise of our automotive industry was inevitable. It's been long foreseen, they cry. It's unstoppable, they say. Yet their reaction to the 1-2 punch of the Holden and Toyota closure announcements and their statements of shock at those announcements and the Alcoa announcement suggests they have been caught entirely by surprise and have no plan. There's been no plan for structural assistance, no retraining options forthcoming, nothing but the Orwellian doublespeak of the liberation provided by unemployment queues. To me, the gravest failing of the Abbott government is not its lack of empathy, although I find that confronting. It's the lack of understanding, it's the lack of imagination, it's the lack of authenticity about jobs of the future. The only impulse I have seen is that the Abbott government would take Australians down a path of teaching Australians that learned helplessness from a government is the only thing that we can expect. The death of the Australian car industry is a tragedy, but it can also be a defining moment for Australia. It can be a call to arms for business, for politics, for employers, for our community. It's a chance to move past those old, constricting cliches of picking winners and corporate welfare. This can be a time when government, investors and business turn their energies to supporting a new generation of research, development and innovation. A wave of Australian discovery and invention in areas like genomics, quantum computing, bionics and nanotechnology can underpin a new era of national prosperity. That is why I believe that we need to make science and innovation a first-order national priority. Not an enclave up the back of the Department of Industry without a nominated Minister for Science, but central to all our policies and our prosperity and our future. We need an innovation-led growth plan, a plan that helps innovators commercialise their ideas, a plan that will ensure Australians benefit from all the amazing advances in health and medical research without bankrupting the nation. A plan that gets Australian kids interested in science and inspires the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs. This is something about which I am passionate, which is why I took responsibility upon becoming opposition leader for the Shadow Science portfolio. And I know our Shadow Minister for Industry, Kim Carr, is equally passionate about these matters. But why are smaller countries with less natural advantage and wealth, Korea, Taiwan, Israel, Finland, they are smaller than us and not as wealthy as us, yet they are all ahead of us in terms of investment in research and development. I believe Australia's level of investment in research and development needs to significantly increase. By 2030, global spending on research and development will increase by 250%. This will be driven by big investments from nations in our region, in China and India, as well as the emerging economic superpowers such as Brazil. Labor believes that making science and innovation a national policy and a political priority is nothing less than an investment in Australian brainpower. Now, it will not be easy at a time of slowing growth and downgraded public revenue, but there are no shortcuts to growth. Industries that invest in research and development are investing in their capacity for reinvention. Compared to businesses that don't innovate, innovative Australian businesses are 78% more likely to report increases in productivity over the previous year. Yet only 25% of Australian businesses collaborate on innovation. So if Australia produces some of the finest research in the world, which we do, why can't we have more collaboration between industry and research sectors? Make no mistake, the science race, the race for the good jobs of the future, is a race to the top, and it has begun across the world. And if Australia is not careful, we will be stuck on the blocks. We do not have 3 years or 6 years to waste. At this very moment, too many Australian school children are being taught science by hard-working but underqualified science teachers. There are too few Australians going on to study science and mathematics in our universities. Our nation is at a crossroads. Australia can either choose to get smarter or get poorer. We can choose to compete or to give up. As with industry policy, success will not depend on government alone. Now, I do believe that government can play an important role in covering investor risk, to helping create a climate of confidence and risk-taking that will encourage entrepreneurs to pursue the breakthroughs that will define this Australian century. As a passionate believer of science and innovation and a believer, an optimist in Australian creativity and ingenuity, I want us to value the startups. And quite often the hardest task for a startup or a small firm is to raise the capital for initial research and development. People in industry call it the valley of death. Strategic government investment can bridge this valley, and I believe the benefits will be remarkable. An innovation-led growth plan must support all budding industries, whether or not they have a focus on agriculture or defence, automotive industry or financial services or health and education services. If we are serious about turning Australian genius into wealth for our nation, why can't we equip our PhD students with the skills they need to commercialise their research? Additional skills such as entrepreneurship, intellectual property management, project management and financial literacy, so they can aspire to be the business leaders as well as the professors. This is a complex argument, and it involves competing with other priorities of government. But it's certainly a tougher argument to outline than no free rides, some jobs start, some jobs go policies. But I believe the Australian people can embrace this debate. I believe in Australian politics substance can trump slogans. My work on the National Disability Insurance Scheme has given me confidence that Australians will give good ideas a fair hearing regardless of political allegiance. I think Australians know and are hungry for serious national debates about where Australia, our home, will be in 2020 and 2030. That is why my focus in opposition is not about Tony Abbott. It's on what are the best policy ideas for the future of our country, for the future of our children. That's why I'm determined to start a conversation about an Australian economy which values science, mathematics, engineering and technology at its core. Mastering this moment of economic transition will require a national effort, one that must begin with government leadership. Shoulder-shrugging fatalism about the death of industries is no prescription for a bright future for our kids and our grandkids. Our world is changing quickly. We can nostalgically rage against the dying of the light, or we can reignite the light on the hill and embrace the opportunities that change offers. Under my leadership, Labor is focused on fighting for jobs and driving innovation to create new jobs. We will insist on a deeper, richer political narrative about the role of science in national politics and our future. We will fight for a prosperous and fair Australia, one that has, as part of its vision, well-remunerated, high-skilled jobs in profitable and globally competitive businesses. Jobs that allow all Australians to provide for their family, to fulfil their potential, and to live a long and happy life full of meaning. Fighting for jobs is Labor's core reason for being. It always has been. And ladies and gentlemen, it will be our priority for the year ahead. Thank you very much.
Okay, we do have some time for questions now. As always, we'll start with working journalists, then open questions more broadly to the floor. And please, if you will, state your name and your organisation. Yes, sir.
Mr. Shorten, Clay Lucas from The Age. Last month, the Abbott government joined Toyota in attempting to change the working conditions of employees at the Altona factory. Today, my newspaper had a story about SPC and an attempt by the Abbott government to reduce salary and conditions at SPC Ardmona. Do you believe the Abbott government is conducting a clandestine war on wages and conditions for Australian workers, or do you believe that it's merely trying to pare back what AIG's Innes Willicks yesterday said were excessively generous conditions for some workers?
I think people would have been surprised this morning to read the story in The Age, Clay, that you've got a government of Australia ringing up SPC and saying the only way that we will parley with you about the future of the Goulburn Valley is if you reduce people's conditions to the award. So let's be clear, when we talk about award and over-award and what people get paid and how much people get paid, food cannery workers get paid $50,000 a year, working all sorts of temperatures all year round and in season working really hard. $50,000. The Abbott government's prescription, or the sort of coercion that they were applying to SPC, was that if you want to get our support, you've got to reduce food processing workers' conditions to the award. How desolate and sterile is a vision of the Abbott government that they say that someone on $50,000 should take a pay cut to $33,000 a year. It's not a plan, that's just a knee-jerk reaction. The Goulburn Valley should be the centre of our food processing and value-adding our food processing. It is not a plan which involves just trying to lower our wages to third world conditions, to the bare minimums of the awards. These people are not overpaid. We've got to move to a more cooperative vision of Australia which says that you don't demonise some sections of the Australian people. The argument which was run out by Joe Hockey and by Tony Abbott on SPC was we can't help save these jobs because they're overpaid. The fat cats don't work on the factory floor. And the point about it is even Sharman Stone, a member of the Liberal Party, came out and said this is just a lie. It's come to a poor state of affairs in Australia where an Australian company has to advertise in the newspaper to explain to people that what the government of the day is saying about them is not right. So I think that the challenge for the Abbott government is rather than focus on what modestly paid middle-class people are getting, work on the innovation agenda. Look at what other countries have done, focus on science, focus on innovation. That's the way forward. A race to the top, not a race to the bottom.
Mr. Shorten, Dennis O'Kane, 3AW. The Greens today have called for a Royal Commission into the management of Australia's offshore detention centres, and the Greens want an investigation with full judicial powers. Will you back that?
I haven't seen what the Greens have said today, but no, at this point, I think the issue here is that there is a real problem at Manus Island. I think any fair-minded Australian, whatever you think about the best way to handle the challenge of people smuggling, would be disturbed by the meltdown. Reports of death, reports of serious injury, reports of hundreds of people not in safe circumstances. That's not how Australia sees itself. So I do think that the Abbott government would be wise to dispense with its addiction to secrecy. Just tell people what's going on. In my experience, most Australians, nearly all of the time, if you tell them what's going on, they mightn't agree with everything, but if you trust people, they'll give you the rope to do what you've got to do. But where you won't tell people what's going on, and the seriousness of this Manus Island, then all of a sudden we get to more extreme debates. So I think the first step before we get to the Greens proposition is that the embattled Minister for Immigration, Scott Morrison, just needs to be upfront with the Australian people and tell us what's happening.
Barry Cassidy, Insiders ABC. Given that health funding in this country is surely unsustainable into the future, what's wrong with a small co-payment that could potentially raise billions of dollars and maybe encourage people to use health services a little more sparingly?
First of all, Australia should be a country where the health care you get should be determined on the health care you need, not how much money you have. We cannot go down the American road where, depending on the size of your bank balance, that becomes a function of the quality of health care you get. So, in addition though, Tony Abbott would be breaking a promise. This idea of a co-payment is his broken promise tax on Australians. I have with me some quotes of what he said before the election. And he said before the election, "We believe in a universal health system." He said, "Medicare and good public schools and public hospitals, I don't see it as middle-class welfare, but the hallmarks of a society that gives families a fair go." He said in America, as he was wont to do during opposition, talk down Australia and Australia, and in America claim Labor accomplishments as his own. He said, "We support a strong Medicare system." He believes, and he said, that he believes it's a benefit which should be supplied or provided to every Australian, rich and poor, rich and not so rich. If he breaks his promise, the Australian electorate will mark him down. In question time last Thursday, I asked him specifically, will you stand by your election promises for there to be no cuts in defence, in education and health? He said he stands by his election promises. Labor thinks that a universal and accessible healthcare system is one of the things which Australians love about this country, and we will fight to keep what is one of the attributes which makes us arguably the best, most livable country in the world.
Ellen Winnett from the Herald Sun. Mr Shorten, given the political poison that is union corruption, and given that we're going to the polls in West Australia now for the Senate, why won't you support a royal commission into union corruption?
So the High Court's handed down its decision, has it, while I was speaking? Okay. Let me be really, again, as I've said before, straightforward. Labor will cooperate with this Abbott Royal Commission into unions. We will cooperate. No one is above the law. Union representative, business person or politician. No one is above the law. So we will do what we have to do to ensure that there is no criminality in Australian industry, but we've also said that where you're dealing with criminals, in particular some of the reports most recently about outlaw motorcycle gangs, is we need to give the police the weapons to do the job that the police do best. We support a joint task force led by the AFP, which could use the standing Royal Commission powers of the already existing Australian Crime Commission. But to return to where I started in that answer, we will fully cooperate with the Abbott Royal Commission onto unions.
John Masanauskas, Herald Sun. Just wondering if you think it's time to put the Republic back on the agenda.
In my first speech in Parliament, I said that I supported a republic. I support the idea of an Australian head of state. What I also recognise is that the Queen is incredibly popular. So if you're asking me where we would spend all our political capital, for me, jobs is the issue for 2014. But I am a Republican. Australia will know when the moment is right. They don't need me as a Republican or Tony Abbott as a monarchist to tell them what to think. I think the answer to your question about when we become a republic will be partly presented by what Australians themselves say and do in future years. I think it is inevitable, but what I also recognise is that for 2014, Labor needs to be on the side of people who want to hang on to good jobs, and we need to be on the side of creating new jobs. That is why we need to make science a political issue of the first importance in this country, because no nation ever dumbed its way to greatness.
Orietta Goro from The Age and Fairfax Media Online. We are headed to the polls in WA after the High Court decision today. You've spoken at length about jobs, but the majority of those jobs have been lost in the eastern states and South Australia. What are the issues that you think the election will be fought on?
Well, Western Australia has had 20 years of unprecedented growth and full employment. But if you look at some of the seasonally adjusted numbers for unemployment in Western Australia, they've gone out to above 5%. Numbers which no doubt Tasmania would be envious of, but on the other hand, for West Australians who've had 20 strong years, this is a challenge. So I believe the issues in Western Australia go to the cost of living. That is an issue which a lot of people in the West are feeling very strongly. It goes to jobs. We saw a major mining services company in Perth go into insolvency last week called Forge. 1,300 people, and these weren't construction workers per se, and they weren't from union membership. These were white-collar engineers and draftspeople from the Kimberley, from the Pilbara, from the Gascoyne, and also working up in far north Queensland. So it's not just manufacturing that's feeling the heat on jobs. What we need in the West is a debate about the cost of living, strategies for jobs. Also, I think that when we look at our mining industry, some people see it as people operating 100-tonne or 240-tonne haul pack trucks up in the Kimberley. We need to start talking about the future of mining and oil and gas and hydrocarbons as a high-tech industry. Under Labor, we see no difficulty with Perth becoming the Houston or Aberdeen of oil and gas, Perth becoming the resources capital of the world. That will involve, though, the adoption of the sort of agenda which I've been outlining today. So I see the issues in the West: jobs, the future of the resources sector, cost of living, and making sure that we don't see further swinging cuts in health and education. I mean, the Commission of Audit, the Commission of Cuts, was due to come out before the Griffith by-election. The government miraculously had to delay their first report till after the Griffith by-election. I don't see how they can delay their first report till after the Senate election, and I think that'll expose the Abbott government's broken promises in health and education.
We've got the students now. What's
Great.
Gianni McCurry from Kilwington Grammar. Mr. Shorten, politicians as leaders that we as young adults look up to. Do you think the way politicians have handled themselves in Parliament recently, especially over the past couple of years, is a representation of a model leader?
I think our leaders need to conduct themselves better than what we've seen, and that goes for all sides of politics. Sometimes it's easy to get a headline with our friends in the media by saying something nasty about each other, but that isn't the way it should be. That's why today I've consciously taken the decision not to have a whole speech listing the sins of the Abbott government, but rather to provide an alternative plan and a national discussion on science, innovation, technology and engineering. I think what people want, I mean, people go with the gossip and the 24 hours, and that's what, fills the 24-hour cycle quite often. But I think that there is a deeper hunger in Australians of all ages to see our politicians talk about how this country should look in 2020 and 2030. I'm incredibly interested in what the jobs you and your schoolmates will be doing in 10 years' time. I suspect that some of the jobs that you and your schoolmates do then haven't yet been invented now. What worries me is if Australia gives up on trying to invent them. We can't all work on a farm or work in a mine, although they're very good careers. We need to be a nation that is ambitious for the future. So I think, yes, the standard of parliamentary debate should be better. I also think that the standard of some of the debate about what passes as the issues could elevate, and that's why I've consciously taken this opportunity at the Melbourne Press Club to talk about a positive view of our future. Why don't we have at the next election an arms race between Liberal and Labor as to who's got the best policies on science? I'm happy to debate Tony Abbott at the next election. Who's got the best ideas for innovation? Who's got the best ideas for startups? Less slogans, more substance. Let us have a debate at the next election, which party is better on science, because that will lead whoever wins to a better outcome for all of us.
Question down the back.
Hi, Mr. Shorten. It's Ray Beattie from the Herald Sun. I was just wondering, I spend a lot of my time in China lately, and sorry, there it goes. That was very rude, that was very rude. So, I spend a lot of time in China, and I see just how quickly, rapidly they expand, they grow, they increase anything they touch. I then see how slowly we do things here in Australia. Now, you gave us a very graphic description of the factories closing, the workers losing jobs, and everything else is happening here, and the need to change our attitudes in our industry. My question is, do we have the time for that? Are we already in that banana republic state?
I don't believe we have 6 years, much less 3 to waste. Your point about China's well made, and when people talk about China and, arguing about its growth rates and should we put all our eggs in the China basket, there are 4 giant first-tier global cities: Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou. But there is another 50 cities in China who have a combined population of 630 million people. They're growing. And we have to make a decision as a nation. The world does not owe this country a living. The world doesn't care if we've read, Thatcher's economics or read Karl Marx's economics. They want to know, the world wants to know, is Australia serious about competing in the world? Education, innovation, science. If we get on board that bandwagon and we recommit to it, I think that the opportunities for speed, which worry you, become greater for us. Do you know, this is the first time since 1931 that a national government does not have a minister for science. People say the nomenclature, the names you give your ministers don't matter. Well, they do. Either we're a nation, we spend a relatively modest amount on R&D in this country. When you look at some of our OECD figures, we just need to recognise that we either get with the program or we give up. Finland in 1990, 1991 went through a terrible recession. Finland, terrible recession, the fall of the Berlin Wall, world was changing. They were in real trouble. So what did Finland do when it came to their science budget? They got falling taxes, economic problems, unemployment. The easy thing to do is to cut your research spend. They went the other way. They increased their expenditure on R&D. 5 years later, Nokia is a world brand. We have a challenge here which this government can take up. Become the champions of science or watch our future disappear.
Thank you. Ken Haley at Swinburne University. Mr. Shorten, traditionally you have pointed out, the Labor Party has always stood for being the party of workers. Also, I would suggest to you, it has prided itself over decades on being the party of international humanitarianism, of the party that gave Doc Evatt to the United Nations, to give just one example. Would you ever think that it is possible for a political leader in Australia in the next 10 years to declare we are a nation that abides by our promises to the refugees of the world, and we will therefore process refugee applications or asylum applications onshore rather than outsource?
Just part of your question was, you've said that Labor was the party of workers. What I've also said is that Labor is the party of jobs. It's the party of small businesses. It's the party of entrepreneurs. So when we talk about Labor, and I know this is not your question, which I'll come to, but I just want to emphasise again how I think Labor and opposition should behave. We need to be the party which includes all Australians. We need to reach out a lot more to small business than we traditionally have. We need to stand up for advanced manufacturing. We don't do it on the basis of nostalgia, but rather pragmatism. It's where our nation needs to go. So we need to, I think, be a big tent which reaches out to more people. Another group of people who your question goes to is immigrants. Immigration has been an unreserved success story in this country. If you take this theme of innovation and entrepreneurs further, disproportionately, first and second generation migrants tend to be more involved with a lot of our entrepreneurial activity. So people who come here by boat or by plane make a contribution to this country, which is the greater for the country as opposed to just the individual. In terms of onshore, offshore processing, Labor policy is that we support regional processing because we don't want people getting into unsafe boats sinking at sea. Now, I know that we're seeing images out of Manus Island which are deeply disturbing. I think long before we get to the resolution of your question, when will we see a Prime Minister of this country get up and tell us what's actually happening with offshore processing? And I'm gravely sceptical that will happen in the next 3 years.
Jonathan Clancy, the CEO of Quinos. Mr. Shorten, Bill, if I may. You've been a great champion of our industry in the petrochemicals, of a lot of productivity reforms, and that's helped us invest $200 million just around the corner from Toyota last year. We've reduced our carbon emissions as a result by 100,000 tonnes per annum. We've put 2 billion litres of potable water back into the system per annum as a result of those investments. The challenge that I have now, which is outside of my control, is not one of productivity, it's of energy. Energy was one of the great sources of competitive advantage of this country, and certainly things like the LNG trains and exports of gas is going to put a lot of pressure, particularly on the east coast of Australia. And I was just wondering if you could comment on your policy thinking on energy.
Quinos is a success story of manufacturing. It's been a process of continuous improvement and change, excellent industrial relations, productive workforce, highly skilled workforce. So if people are looking for examples when they say that, shrug their shoulders and say we can't manufacture here anymore in heavy industry, they should have a look at Quinos because they've done nearly everything that should be done. In energy, it is a fundamental driver of our success. And so let's put a couple of basic points out there as we work through our energy policy for the next election. One is we will still be a coal-producing nation. We have a lot of coal. Now, I think we should absolutely focus on trying to make that as clean as possible. But anyone from the sort of far left who says that we can be a country that should just shut down all our coal operations is kidding, because there is nothing to replace it. It's part of our makeup. But that is not an argument against improving its environmental values. I think gas is the big challenge. I know it's a big challenge for your business. Labor set up a national process to work through policies around fracking. And I think that whilst we've got to balance environmental concerns and short-term use of gas versus long-term food bowl uses of the same land, we need to have a sensible policy debate about fracking, because I think that will be part of our energy mix as we go forward. I also think that when it comes to issues of energy, we need to see how we can improve competition in our energy markets, because greater competition invariably benefits the consumer. So there's some down payments on our thinking in terms of resources going forward.
We've got time for a couple more questions. While we wait for the next question, I just want to pick up on the High Court ruling on WA app today. You spoke of some of the issues you want to raise during the re-election campaign. Politically, what do you see as a good result for the Labor Party in terms of seats and the like on the new election?
Well, Labor's been electorally challenged in Western Australia in the last couple of elections. Let me put that another way, we haven't done very well. Our challenge is to connect with West Australians. The state opposition led by Mark McGowan's doing a reasonable job. Colin Barnett is perhaps not travelling as well as he would like, and there are polls over there. The challenge for National Labor, I think, is to demonstrate to the resources industry that despite the scale of our reform, our process of dialogue was clearly incredibly flawed. So we need to pay the green fee to engage with the resources sector. We need to sit down and work with them and demonstrate to them that we're interested in the future of resources, which is a big part of Western Australia. A good result for us would be 2 senators, because in the first count we got 2, in the second count we got 1, then of course there's 1,300 votes missing. So 2 would be good, but I think for me the opportunity of this unprecedented Senate election in Western Australia, to the best of my knowledge, there has never been a by-election federally of 1.4 million people in the nation. For me, it's a chance for Labor to listen and to demonstrate that we are interested in the future of the West. It's not to lecture from the East Coast about the West Coast. For us, it's about demonstrating that we're in touch with cost of living, with jobs, with the future of the state, also with defending the services such as education and healthcare, which are fundamental to our quality of life. I didn't want this election because obviously we don't want to see Australians put through the cost and effort of a by-election, but the High Court having ruled, I certainly welcome the opportunity to talk to West Australians about their future and our commitment to the future of the West.
I just want to go back to you, the policy as you articulated it on industry assistance, and what you said today is that you're prepared to give assistance to companies that innovate. It's about innovation. How does that square with Labor's decision about a year ago to give $40 million to Alcoa, a company that now admits that its machinery and equipment was so out of date that it couldn't possibly afford to replace it?
The decision was made 2 years ago plus with Alcoa. The fact that 1,200 people directly plus 1,000 people directly plus many contractors have had the benefit of full employment for the next 3 years is reasonable. And Labor should always be in the business of trying to keep people in work, certainly until we can find alternatives. What we now face at Point Henry is it's a chance for me to do the right thing by that workforce and company and just say this: industrial action, nil. Productivity, high. In terms of the level of people working there, it had gradually been coming down over time, so you had fewer people doing more. They generate, in that time that you talk about, Barry, $300 million in taxes in the Geelong economy and economic value. So I think that we got good value for that support. And I think it's a trifle unfair of the Treasurer to just attack Alcoa. They're still going to employ 4,500 people at Portland and in the West, Kwinana, Wagerup, Pinjarra. So I think that Alcoa and its workforce have done the right thing by the Australian people for 50 years. And if a Labor government can help and a Labor Party can stand by people who've done the right thing for 50 years, I think that's called loyalty. And certainly we'll be asking for more than $40 million from the Abbott government to help retrain this workforce in the future. We cannot abandon people merely because they're 50. The average age of the worker at Alcoa is 48. Now, I won't guess the average age of people in this room, but what I will say is the older you get, there is a remorseless meanness about the prospect of employing older people. It doesn't have to be the way, but the only way we can break that cycle of older people experiencing longer periods of unemployment is you invest in them. It'll cost more than $40 million to do that, Barry.
Bill, Damien Menzies from Choice Career Services. I'm encouraged by what I heard today about the industry policy. I guess I have two questions to ask. Firstly, when is Labor going to start to take some initiative and take some action? It's all nice to hear the talk. And secondly, for the employees of the automotive industry and I guess also Alcoa, what is, I'm sure the government will come out next week and promise training and whatever else they'll offer, but I think what those workers need is a picture of where industry is going and the jobs that are likely to be created so that then they can focus their retraining efforts to, moving towards in that direction. And I think that's what's really sadly lacking at the moment from both parties.
Damien, in answer to your first part, when can Labor do it? It's when we get elected. I don't think it'll happen too much beforehand, although putting the propositions to the government certainly may be a triumph of hope over experience, but we've got to do it. In all candidness, in terms of training and retraining, Some people will never work again as a result of these decisions. The question is what proportion we decide won't work again. See, when I look at people in overalls, I don't see some sort of liberal cliche. I don't see them as some overpaid industrial worker bludging. I know that they're problem solvers, they're multi-skilled. I know that they're capable of exercising initiative. I know that I've seen various levels of middle management stripped out of these companies, and I see people who can work in teams really well. The challenge is to get someone who's been doing the same job for 10 or 15 or 20 years to see in the mirror their skills and not just what they were. That's why you can't just say, here's $10 million and they can go and get a certificate in something. We need to, when we have change, it's not, Labor's sometimes characterised about being against change in manufacturing. We're not. That list of companies I mentioned at the start should show I get that change happens. What I don't get is when no one gives a stuff about how the change happens. What I don't get is, it's one thing for the people at the front of the train, call it the Abbott government, they get out. The rest of Australia, we're like the people catching the train, and you've got Captain Abbott at the front of the train saying, right, we're going from A to B. What does Joe Hockey say? New dawn, blue sky. Tony Abbott says we're going to liberate you. I get that when they get in the train and the train takes off, what I don't get is their look of surprise when they stick their head out halfway between where they've been to the destination they think Australia should get to, and they notice everyone's still milling around on the railway platform where they were from. Because unless you explain to people where they fit in change, it makes change very hard. Unless you explain to people where their seat is, and that's not a question of welfare, that's a question of saying, I think you as a human being are worth something. You're not a two-dimensional number, you're not a cost, you're not an award wage or an above award wage, you're a person. The people who do the manufacturing and the people who work at Census, they are predominantly women with tertiary degrees. They've been pinged yesterday. The people at Forge in Western Australia are tertiary graduates, some of them. So it's not all just factory workers. But wherever someone loses a job, I recognise that the person that's affected pays their taxes. They'd like to be able to pay off their mortgage. They try and pay their kids' school fees. They may be trying to find their aunt or their uncle some form of dignified aged care accommodation. They run their local sporting clubs. So unemployment is not liberation. You are quite right, Damien, you've got to have a no-nonsense real deal. There have been examples of it working properly. When BHP, with their Iron River development, closed the steel mills in 1994, I think they did that okay. I can see the prospect of other companies having individual packages of support to explain to people where they fit in. But I think the government's happy to take the taxes off these companies in the good times. When you're a citizen of our nation, occasionally you expect your government to stand alongside you when the times are tough and say, you know what, we're grateful for your last 30 years working at this company. We think you've got more years in you. We think you are valuable. We don't think you should retire poor. We don't think you're some sort of ideological whipping boy to have a go at attacking Labor. So it's a real fair dinkum test. And for all those commentators and observers who say Labor's on the wrong train, it's just get, the future, the future, the future. I have spent my whole adult life helping people get to the future. What I don't get is when some people think that change is just for the benefit of the some and not the many. Unless change is for the benefit of the many, we need to go back to the drawing board as I'm proposing and work out how we make change for the many and the benefits for the many. It is not right in this country that the benefits of change should be allocated to a few and the costs of change should be allocated to the many. That's not the way we should operate in this country, and it's not our future.
Sadly, time is against us. I know there are a few other questions there on the floor. Thank you again. And on behalf of the Melbourne Press Club, Bill, thank you for making time for us. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Bill Shorten.
Thanks. Thank you.
And that wraps up the lunch. Just a quick reminder of the next event of the Melbourne Press Club, of course, is the Quills Award, which is Victorian Journalism's Night of Nights on Friday, March the 21st. If you haven't got a ticket already, please go and buy one. They're on sale at our website at the moment. It's always a great night. But otherwise, thank you all very much for your attendance today. Have a fantastic afternoon. Goodbye.